Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and welcome to the next lesson in our D programming language series. In this lesson, I'm going to be talking about arrays in the D programming language. Now, there's actually four kinds of arrays in the D programming language. There's static and dynamic, which is what we're going to talk about today, those two. And there's also pointer and associative arrays, which we'll talk about in a future lesson. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those. But with that said, let's go ahead and talk about arrays in the D programming language and why they're quite nice in D. So here's the different kinds, and you can go ahead and look at the D language spec and at this URL if you want to go ahead and see all the different types. Now, as mentioned, we're just going to be looking at static and dynamic arrays. So I'm going to go ahead and click on static arrays. So we go down here, and we're going to find that static arrays themselves have some nice properties. So if I scroll down here even further, let me get down to the properties section here. Here's our array properties, and for static arrays, you're going to see that we can do some nice things like get the length. Now, this is something that you can't really do with raw arrays in other languages like C or C++, for example, and you have to rely on some other container data structure. Well, this is common enough thing that we might want to do with our arrays that we just have a .length property. And we can also do some things like duplicate our arrays, for instance, so you might want to check these out. But today, for our introduction, let's just go ahead with understanding what arrays are. And especially if you're new to programming, you're going to want to be familiar with arrays because, well, they're just used very often and have many good reasons why we want to use them for storing our data. So with that said, just to get everybody on the same page, an array typically is a data structure that looks like this. Usually we have some amount of elements stored in a contiguous block of memory. We index from 0 in the D programming language, and then we store some contents here, maybe some numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe some characters like M, I, K, E, and single quotes since these are individual characters, but that's the idea. Now, the different types of arrays that we have in D, again, are going to be static and dynamic. Those are the two that we're going to be talking about today. So the idea with static is it's a fixed size. So that means that when we run our program, we decide how big it's going to be. That means that if we say, hey, I want an array of 4 contiguous characters, it's always going to be 4. But dynamic, on the other hand, is going to be resizable. And that means we can shrink it or expand it. So if we think that we might expand, then this is a more reasonable data structure that we want to use. And D makes it relatively easy for us to switch between static and dynamic. Syntactically, at least, it's just very clean when you're choosing your type. So with that said, let's go ahead and just look at a few examples and get some practice with static and dynamic arrays. So I've already got one set up here of an array here, but I actually want to start off with this one by asking you, well, what is the size of this? Well, it looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 elements, and we can go ahead and just run this, and it will print out all the contents of our array here. And we can also, again, query some properties of this array here. So let's go ahead and try .length, and let's see what we get here. So if I run this, we'll see that the length is 4. Okay, now this here in particular is a dynamic array in the D programming language. We haven't specified a size here. We've just put brackets stating that, well, this is going to be an array. And you can kind of remember the brackets if you want to think about the actual, block of memory that's being stored in here. That's one way that I think about it for beginners when sort of teaching it, that, we're going to have some data within this chunk or block. And D uses a clean syntax here. Other languages use curly braces, but D uses brackets, which I think matches things like Python's list data structure, for instance. But again, this is an array. So let's say we don't need this flexibility to be able to resize this, and we want it to be static. So what we can do is inside here is just specify that, hey, we want exactly 4 characters here. So let's go ahead and rerun this program here, and you'll see that it runs just the same. Now, if I want to change one of these characters, and let me go ahead and label this. This is a static array because we chose the size, and I'll go back and forth and remind you. Let's go ahead and access one of the characters here, which we use the brackets again to do. We count from 0, and let's make this an uppercase M, rerun our program, and we can see the associated change here with the uppercase Mike here. Okay, so that's the idea or accessing information. Now let's say we mess up this index here, and I try to access something like, oh, I don't know, at the value 6. Now clearly we can see where this data is, But let's go ahead and try to run this. And the compiler, again, is actually smart enough indeed to tell us that, hey, where it can prove it and see that this index is clearly out of bounds, because we have this property.length that it can check here, it's just going to fail the compilation, which is really nice here. Okay, let's try this same example with our dynamic array. So because I didn't specify a size, here's our dynamic array. I'll run it, and this time I get an error. This time it's happening at runtime and telling you that, hey, at this point in time when we ran into line number 8 here, just to show you how to read this message. So main.d file at line 8, which is over here, we were accessing something that was out of bounds here. And it'll actually tell you the exact length here. So again, this is a really nice thing or feature in the deprogramming language that can help just save us some time here. Okay, so it works the same for dynamic or static arrays, in which we can kind of figure out when we're accessing something that's out of bounds. Okay, so with that said, I do want to focus a little bit more on dynamic arrays here, because they have some more interesting things that we can do with them. So let me just go ahead and label this so that it's clear. Now, this idea here of what we can do is perhaps we want to expand our actual array here. So what I'm going to do here is say data, and then the tilde mark equals, and what I want to expand it with, and I'm going to put in this just array with an exclamation mark. Let's go ahead and rerun this. And you can see that we have expanded our array by 1 here. And I've just kind of used this array syntax here, like we did before with the brackets here, to append on another element. And we can see that our data again has grown 5, and we see the exclamation mark. So this is pretty cool here. Now, of course, I could append another array. So let's go ahead and put something at the end here. Maybe just my last initial here. So I could also do, append something like that. And you could go ahead and see, Mike's or Mike S here. And we're appending this array here. So really a flexible syntax here. Now let's go ahead and add some other characters here. And let's go ahead and put my last name in here. Rerun this just so you can see that we're growing our list. But maybe I didn't want to actually append this entire list here. Maybe again, I just wanted a piece of it, or indeed we call this a slice here. So I can actually just take a small chunk of our actual array here. So let me go ahead and do this here. So I can just specify from 0 to 1. Okay. So let's go ahead and see what the result of that is. So I'm just grabbing a slice of this array and appending it to my data here. So that just gives me the first character. The slice from 0 to 2. Again, I can rerun. Slice from 0 to 3. And you get the idea. And if I want the whole thing, I could put in 4. I could do, well, let's try something like append.length. Let's see if that would work here. That would also work. And there's actually a shorthand because often we might want to do that. We can just use the $sign here. Okay, and that'll give us the same as 0 to 4. So I'll just go ahead and put the comment. Dollar is the same as append.length. And watching that carefully, you can kind of notice where the actual bounds were of the array. It's giving you, it's not including this last element when we're adding the slice in to make sure that we don't go out of bounds. Now, the last thing that I'll show you to kind of get you introduced here is let's go ahead and change our data type here. Or maybe let's just create another array so we can see everything on one screen here. Let's just go ahead and create a dynamic integer array here. I'm just going to call it integers. And let's go ahead and populate it with a few numbers here. But something that we can do that's somewhat interesting is take our integers here and then actually perform an operation on all of them. So I can go ahead and say, let's take our integers here and let's add 5 to each of them. And then let's go ahead and print them out. Now, I haven't taught you for each loops yet, but I think you'll get the idea. We'll refer to everything as I here in our integers. And let's just go ahead and write out each of these i's on a separate line here. And I'll go ahead and run this. And you'll see here, if I make our code a little bit larger here, starting from here, I've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've basically applied this operation of +5 to each of our integers here. And again, that can be a really clean thing to do if you're using some arithmetic operations, or maybe just want to apply some other operation to everything in the array, which again is something that's super useful to do in programming, and we'll get into more of what that actually means in a future lesson. All right, so just to recap as we wrap things up here, we've talked about static arrays and dynamic arrays that are resizable versus a fixed size. And they can be bounds checked. We can access individual slices of our array, and we can append different arrays together if we are using dynamic arrays. I'll put appendable. That's part of the resizing aspect of it. And overall, it's just a relatively clean syntax for working with a data structure that you're going to be using all the time. So folks, with that said, I hope that was a useful introduction for two of the different types of arrays that are available in D. We're going to look at the other ones later on in this series, associative arrays, relatively soon. And the pointer arrays are going to be useful if you're looking at using D as a programming language for interfacing or upgrading a lot of your old C code. So again, really cool language, really clean implementation of arrays in my opinion, and it's got the nice safety and bounds checks that we really need in programming languages, in my opinion, for writing safer and more modern code. So with that said, folks, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.